In this class, we will learn the first Daf of Masechah Sotah. We will be learning Daf Beis. So we could divide this class into 5 parts. So our Gemara, we could say, consists of 5 parts. Number 1 is we will present the Mishnah. Number 2, we will explain why Masechah Sotah comes after Masechah Nazir. Number 3, the Gemara will discuss whether kinui is forbidden for a husband to warn his wife against secluding herself with a certain man. Number 4, the Gemara will present and discuss the source that one aid is believed to testify that a Sotah did an Avera. And number 5, the Gemara will present and discuss the 3 opinions about how many aidim are needed for kinui and stira. How many witnesses are needed by the kinui, which is the warning, and stira, the seclusion. The Mishnah teaches, Hamekana, a person who warned his wife. So we have over here a machlekes. So before we present the machlekes, it's just important to note that we're talking about a Sotah over here. And a Sotah is basically a woman who was warned against secluding herself with a certain man that the husband felt was inappropriate for her to be secluded with him. And this woman nevertheless went against the warning of her husband and secluded herself with that man. And because we have over here a warning, and then in addition we have the seclusion, this creates a situation of a high degree, a high level of suspicion that this woman did an Avera, and as a result, she is now forbidden to live with her husband, and she needs a divorce in order to end the marriage. However, the Torah rules that in order to bring about that the husband may remain married to his wife, the Torah created something completely novel, and that is that there's a way to clarify and verify that the woman did not do an Avera through the waters of a Sotah. So the waters of a Sotah are specifically there in the case where the woman claims she did not do an Avera and does not want the marriage to come to an end, and she says, I'm choosing to rather drink the waters of the Sotah to confirm that I am innocent. And although this woman did act immodestly because she was warned against it and she went against the warning, nevertheless, 2 things. The Torah gives something so unique that we're erasing Hashem's name in order for her to become permitted to her husband. And number 2, if she's found that she didn't do an Avera, although she behaved in an immodest manner, we find that there are a number of blessings that she receives. So regarding this case of a Sotah, we have an argument, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says he warns her in front of 2 Eidim and he makes her drink by his word or the word of 1 aid. So when it comes to the warning, in order for us to confirm and accept that there was a warning, it has to be that 2 witnesses testify that the warning occurred. Otherwise, as far as we know, no warning occurred. And if the husband says that his wife secluded herself, there's no issue with that because there's no warning. There was no warning against it. So in order to confirm and verify that there was a warning, it has to be based on the testimony of 2 witnesses. However, when it comes to the testimony that the wife went against the warning and did seclude herself, so over there it's enough that the husband testifies to that or 1 aid. Rabbi Yeshua, however, holds that he warns her in front of 2 Eidim and he makes her drink by the word of 2 Eidim. That both the warning to his wife, the testimony that warning occurred, and the testimony that the wife went against the warning, both of them have to be by the word of 2 Eidim in order for us to confirm that that's the case. So they basically argue about the seclusion. Is it enough to have the husband or 1 aid testify that it occurred, or is it necessary to have 2 Eidim? The Mishnah now proceeds to the second part, and the Gemara will discuss the understanding of it because it's not so clear. And the Mishnah says, how does he warn her? What's exactly the process? The Mishnah says, if he tells her not to talk to so-and-so, and she did, so the husband told his wife not to talk to a certain individual, she did talk to him, so it's also only an issue of talking. So then the halacha is, she is still mutter to her husband and to eat truma. There's no issue over here. She's permitted and she's not forbidden to her husband. And if her husband is a kayin, just like any woman married to a kayin, she's permitted to eat truma. The Mishnah continues, however, if she went into a secluded place with him, with the individual that the husband warned her against, and stayed there for enough time to do an Avera, then she is asr to her husband, she is forbidden, because we have a great degree of suspicion that an Avera occurred, and she's also asr to eat truma, because the marriage to her husband is not a marriage which is allowed to continue, and therefore she's not permitted to eat truma. And the Mishnah concludes that if her husband then died, so we have the woman that secluded herself, and she did not drink the waters of the Sotah, and the husband did not yet divorce her, and at that point the husband died, and they didn't have any children. So typically now this woman is a Yavama, and the brothers have an obligation to first do Yibum, and if not Yibum, to do Chalitza. So in this case, since this woman is no longer permitted to her husband, she's forbidden to her husband, so she's also forbidden to the brothers. However, she was married to the husband right before he died, and therefore there was a bond to the husband, and as a result a bond to the brothers. So therefore she must do Chalitza, and she may not do Yibum. The Gemara asks, why does the Tana teach Sotah after finishing Nazir? How does Sotah come to be placed, the Maseches Sotah, after Maseches Nazir? Why did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi organize it in this way? And the Gemara responds, it's like Rabbi taught. What did Rabbi teach? And he presents it in the source. We learned in a Braisa, Rabbi says, why does the Torah teach Nazir after Sotah? In the Torah we also find this order of Nazir being next to Sotah. Just in the Torah it's Sotah and then Nazir. Rabbi says, why does the Torah teach Nazir after Sotah? It's to tell you that whoever sees a Sotah in her disgraced state should become a Nazir from wine. So that's why also the Tana put Sotah after Nazir. The Gemara proceeds to ask, so first teach Sotah and then Nazir. According to the teaching of Rebbe, it should first be Sotah. Whoever sees a Sotah in her disgrace should make himself a Nazir. So he should first have Maseches Sotah and then Maseches Nazir. And the Gemara answers that we have to look at the broader context. If we just look at Nazir and Sotah, then it's correct. First should be Sotah and then Nazir. But there's a broader context over here, and that is, how did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the first place these Masechtas of Nazir and Sotah where they are? Not just in relation to one another, but in this order in relation to the previous Masechtas that he taught. And he explains as follows. It says, this is what he did. Since Rabbi Yehuda Nasi taught Ksubis, and in it, one of the Prakim is Parak HaMadir, so he taught Nedarim. Because Parak HaMadir speaks about Nedarim, so he went into Nedarim. And since he taught Nedarim, as a result, so he taught Nazir, which is a form of a neder. It's one of the Nedarim that are there, that a person can take a vow. And since he taught Nazir, he taught Sotah. So in other words, Rabbi Yehuda came to place Nazir where it is. And since there is a relationship, an association, there's a connection between Nazir and Sotah, so after Nazir, he placed Sotah. But it's not that we already had in place, for example, Sotah, which then we could put Nazir, but rather we had Nazir in place, and then we could have a reason to insert in place Sotah. The Gemara now proceeds to a new thing. That's why we see that it's in a separate line for itself. It comes out from the Mishnah. So we had the first part, which is the inquiry with the response, followed with the source, and then the question and answer. Now the Gemara begins something new. It's a short little thing. It's an observation. That's why it's in a gray box with the arrow pointing upwards to indicate it's an observation on something that was said beforehand. And what the Gemara is focusing on is the first word in the Mishnah. It says hamekane, which means somebody who warned his wife. It happened already. So the Gemara points out that we see from here b'di'evid in lechatchila no loy, which means b'di'evid, yes, we have the case, so to speak, of mekane, and we're going to discuss it, but not lechatchila, not originally, because our Tana holds, we see from here, that kinui, for a man to warn his wife, is usher, it's forbidden. A person should not do such a thing. So the Tana doesn't say mekane, a person does warn his wife, but rather hamekane, one who warned his wife. And then Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua proceed to teach what they hold are the criteria for that warning to have been a good warning, followed with a seclusion that's considered a good seclusion that Bezdin accept. But that's only b'di'evid once it happened that the person warned his wife. But l'chatchila, originally a person should not be warning his wife, so we see that our Tana holds that kinui is forbidden. And we'll see later in the parak that there are actually other opinions as well, that they don't hold that kinui is forbidden. The Gemara now proceeds to present another teaching, and it's a new teaching over here. And it's from Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. He said that when Rish Lakish would start Maseches Sotah, he would start by saying that ein mezavgin loy la'adam isha elo lefi ma'asav, which means that a person would only gets a spouse. It would only be matched for him based on his deeds, based on his actions. And he brings a pasuk, like it says, shenemar ki lo yanuach shevet haresha al goyer latzadikim, which means for the rod of the wickedness shall not rest upon the lot of the righteous. So we see that somebody who's righteous will not receive somebody who is wicked, and the reverse as well. The Gemara now proceeds to present the related teaching, and that's why it comes out from the side of this one. And this is from Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, and he says, "V'koshin l'zavgon kikriyas yamsuf," and it's difficult to pure them up. The match of the two people, like kriyas yamsuf, is difficult. And he brings a pasuk, shenemar Elikim Moshe v'Yechidim Baisa Moitzi Asirim B'Kaisharis. Elikim Moshe v'Yechidim Baisa means Hashem, He gathers Yechidim, individuals, Baisa in a house. It means a husband and a wife. Moitzi Asirim, He releases prisoners. B'Kaisharis means when it's a Zman Mukhshar, a good time, which refers to Hashem taking out the Yidden from Mitzrayim in a good season, that it was in Nisan time. So we see that the two things are compared there in the same pasuk, placing a couple in a home and taking the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, which is only complete through Kriyas Yamsuf, are compared to one another, because that's how difficult it is to be mezavig the husband and a wife. The Gemara now proceeds to present a question on the teaching of Reish Lakish. And the Gemara says, Eini, is this really so? That a person receives his zivug based on his actions? But Rav Yehuda Rav said that 40 days before Yetziras Avlad, a Baskel declares their spouse. So we see it's already before a person's born, it's already decided who's going to be their spouse, which zivug they're going to receive. Whereas whether they'll be a tzaddik or a rasha, that's loy ka'amar, that's not said. So that we have the teaching here from Rav Yehuda Marav that our boim yim kaidim Yetziras Avlad Baskel Yetzis Vo'imeris. It says Bas Pleni Lepleni, Bias Pleni Lepleni, and Sotah Pleni Lepleni. So we see all these things already determined already beforehand. And the Gemara responds, Loi Kasha, it's not a difficulty, because Habezivig Rishain, Habezivig Sheni. This that we say that it's already known, Kaidim Yetziras Avlad, that's Zivig Rishain, that's the first marriage. And when it says that it's Lefi Maisav, that's Bezivig Sheni, that's in the second marriage. The Gemara now begins by presenting an observation of what was said in the Mishnah, and that's why it's in the gray box with the arrow pointing upwards. And the Gemara says, Ad kan le pligi ele bekina v'stira, aval betuma eid hechad me'emen, that they only argue by kina and stira, and they're not arguing by both. So Rashi addresses it. But the point is that they don't have a discussion about two edim, or they only have the discussion about two edim by kina and stira. But when it comes to the Tuma, there eid echad mehemen, which means that if one witness testifies that he observed that the wife that was already warned did an avera, then he's going to be believed. The Gemara proceeds to bring a source, a support, a proof for this. Utnan Nami, a Mishnah also taught, Eid echad oimer ni reisi shenitmes lehoisa shaisa. If one aid says, I saw her do an avera, she doesn't drink the mei saita because we believe him that she did the avera, and therefore she's not permitted to drink the waters of the saita, which will inform us that she didn't, when over here we accept and believe that she did. So now that we had this observation followed by the proof, the Gemara now asks, from where in the Torah do we learn that one aid is believed? The Mishnah is ruling this way. We have the other Mishnah, but what is the source for it in the Torah? The Gemara now proceeds to present the Brisa, which would lead into the response to this inquiry. And that's why it's in a gray box with the arrow pointing downwards to indicate that it's leading into the answer. The answer is not yet presented. And the answer is based on a Brisa. The Tana Rabbanan, it's taught in a Brisa. The Pasuk says by Sotah, Ve'eid ein ba. Says the Brisa, this means B'shnayim akasav medaber. which means two Eidim. So the pasuk is saying there aren't two Eidim against her, but there is one. The Brisa continues and says, and if you say it means one aid, maybe it means ve'ed ein ba, there is not one aid testifying against her. The Brisa says we know that's not what the case. How do we know? Because it says elsewhere, lo yakum aid echad beish. One person will not stand to testify against the person. And the question that's asked over here is, since it says aid, don't we already know it's one? It should just say lo yakum aid beish. Why does it say lo yakum aid echad beish? And the answer is that it's a binyan, we make a binyan from here. From here we learn to everywhere else that it teaches us that any time it says aid, it means two. And therefore, over here, since it doesn't mean two, it needs to specify and say aid echad. So we have a binyan av. A binyan av means that whatever is said in one place, we'll apply it everywhere else as long as it's reasonable to say so. And since over here the pasuk said lo yakum aid echad beish, and it didn't say lo yakum aid beish, the pasuk is in other words teaching us that when the word aid is used, it means two, and therefore it's necessary in this case where it means one to specify lo yakum aid echad beish. But everywhere else it's shnayim. So that's the brisa that says. That's the brisa that we're presenting here, which will lead into our answer. The brisa basically tells us that in the pasuk that talks about the Sotah, and it says ve'ed ein ba, it means to say that there aren't two Eidim testifying against her, but there is one Eid that is testifying against her. And this brisa now leads into the answer to the original inquiry. Now we have the response to the inquiry. We had the shaila was, where do we see in the Torah that one Eid is believed? And the tshuva is that the pasuk says here by the Sotah, it uses the term aid, like the Brisa pointed out. So we see that there aren't two Eidim. Ve'ed ein ba, there aren't two Eidim that are testifying against her, but there is one Eid. So it's referring to a case that there is one Eid. And what does the pasuk say afterwards? Ve'ed ein ba vehi lo nispasa, and she wasn't forced, which means we're saying this woman wasn't forced to do the Avera. She did it willingly. And that simply means we're talking about a woman who did an Avera, and she's going to be forbidden. She's usher to her husband. On what basis is it? The pasuk says that she wasn't forced. What basis do we make her forbidden? Because ve'ed ein ba, there weren't two Eidim testifying against her, but there was one. So that's the source in the Torah that we find that one Eid is believed by a Sotah. The Gemara now proceeds to present a question, and as we can see over here, the question comes from the side of the Brisa, which indicates it's not a challenge on what we said. It's not beneath it, which is saying there's an issue with what we said. It doesn't come under it and after it, meaning that it's challenging what was said, but rather we had our shaila and we have our tshuva. What's the source in the Torah? We presented a brisa, which now explains and presents to us the source. But now the Gemara is going to go off and start discussing and questioning the actual brisa itself. And the Gemara says, so the reason that we know that when it says ve'ed ein ba by Sotah, the way we know that it means there aren't two, but there is one. How do we know it means there aren't two? Maybe it means there isn't one. We said the way that we know that it doesn't mean it means that there aren't two is because whenever it says aid, it means two, because it says lo yakum aid echad beish. So when it means one, it has to say echad. So the Gemara challenges that. So it's only because it says lo yakum aid echad beish, and otherwise we would say, if not for that ve'ed ein ba means one aid. Is that how we would read it? Ve'ed ein ba means there's no aidim. That can't be. We don't need lo yakum aid echad beish to teach it to us. We know it on our own. How do we know it on our own? The Gemara explains, but if there isn't one aid, how would she become usher? Of course the pasuk has to be read ve'ed ein ba to mean there weren't two aidim, but rather there was one. Because if it meant to say there wasn't one aid, then how would she be usher? We just explained that the pasuk is referring to a woman who becomes usher. It says ve'ed ein ba vehi lo nispasa. She wasn't forced, and therefore she's usher. How did she become usher if there was not even one aid? So the Gemara is basically challenging, why is it necessary in this case to bring an outside support that when it says ve'ed ein ba, it means there weren't two aidim? We already know it from the pasuk itself. The pasuk itself doesn't allow us, it would seem, doesn't allow us to read ve'ed to mean one aid. It has to mean two aidim. So the Gemara is basically asking a question on this brisa. Again, it's unrelated to our direct discussion. We have our source that one aid is believed. When it says ve'ed ein ba, it means there weren't two, but rather there's one. That remains intact. And the Gemara answers, Itzrich, we do need the pasuk of La Yakum Eid Echad Be'ish to inform us that Eid by Ve'eid Einba means two Eidim, because otherwise we would learn that it means Ve'eid Einba, that one Eid. How would we read the pasuk? There's not an Eid, then why is she Asr? So the Gemara says, because we'd explain the pasuk to mean Ve'eid Einba means Ve'eid Ein Nemanba. The pasuk is teaching us that one Eid is not believed over here. That's what the pasuk is teaching us. So we wouldn't read that it means there is no Eid, but Ve'eid Einba, there is no Eid in her, meaning that there's no Eid that would be believed to testify against her. The Gemara now challenges and questions this answer. How can we say that Ve'eid Einba comes to teach us that one Eid is not believed in her? What does it mean? One Eid is not believed? Then what is needed? Two Eidim? So in other words, this pasuk is teaching us that one Eid is not believed, and two Eidim are needed in order to accept the testimony. If that's the case, we don't need this pasuk to teach that to us, that one Eid is not believed. We know that. Then we don't need this pasuk at all, since we can learn from the Gzeira Shava of davar for money. It says by money, al pi shnayim edim yakum davar, and it says by matters of arayis, ki matzah ba ervas davar. And we learn through that Gzeira Shava that two Eidim are needed. So it wouldn't make any sense to interpret the pasuk this way, that Ve'eid Einba means one Eid is not believed. We don't need this pasuk for that. We already know it. So how can we say that's how we would learn the pasuk? It's not an option to learn the pasuk that way. So our original question comes back to place. And the Gemara answers, Itzrich, we do need La Yakum Eid Echad Be'ish. Our original answer is correct, that otherwise we'd read Ve'eid Einba to mean one Eid is not believed. And then the question that is asked, then what's it teaching us? One Eid is not believed, but rather you need two Eidim. We don't need to be taught that. We already know it from the Gzeira Shava of davar. The Gemara says, no, we don't know it from there. Because otherwise we'd say that by Sotah, we don't need two Eidim. If we didn't say Ve'eid Einba, one Eid is not believed, and rather you need two, you would think one Eid is believed. And why would you say one Eid is believed? We know from the Gzeira Shava that you always need two Eidim by matters of arayos. The Gemara says the reason you'd say that by a Sotah, one Eid is believed, as is actually the case, and for this very reason. But what you would say is that by Sotah, one Eid is believed because there's reglayim l'davar. There's a basis for it. This woman was warned against secluding herself with this man, and she went ahead and did seclude herself. So there's so much of a basis for it. Therefore, maybe you would learn that we do believe one Eid, and that's why the pasuk would be telling us, all in this theoretical situation, that Ve'eid Einba is not believed. Obviously, according to the conclusion, it's actually telling us this very thing. Ve'eid Einba, there aren't two Eidim, there's only one, and one is believed for this very reason. The Gemara now proceeds and continues to question the answer that we presented. And the Gemara asks, how can we read and understand the pasuk to mean Ve'eid Einba means Ve'eid Ein Nemanba, one Eid is not believed regarding this woman? The Gemara says, and can we say it means one Eid is not believed? In order for that to be an interpretation to be accepted, it has to fit into the entirety of the pasuk. And the problem is, but from this, that it's written V'hilin Espasa, we see that she's Asr. So how would we read the pasuk? The pasuk tells us Ve'eid Einba, one Eid is not believed by her, and then suddenly it tells us she wasn't forced, and she's now forbidden to her husband. How did that come about? We're teaching that one Eid is not believed. How do we suddenly shift to saying that she's Asr? How did she become Asr? And the Gemara answers, no, Itzrich, we do need Lo Yakum Eid Echad Be'ish, because there is still a way to read this pasuk. What we said originally does stand. We would read Ve'eid Einba means that one Eid is not believed. Then how do we read the rest of the pasuk? V'hilan Espasa, she wasn't forced and she's forbidden. We'd read it as follows. He says, if not for Lo Yakum Eid Echad Be'ish, otherwise we'd read the pasuk that Eid Ein Nemanba, one Eid is not believed, and you have to add in and two are. And even then, only if Vihila Espasa, if she wasn't forced, then the two Eidim are believed and are effective in making her forbidden to her husband. But if she was forced, she wouldn't become forbidden because it's an oinus. The Gemara now proceeds to a new discussion, and over here we'll do a few of the shapes at a time in each audio. The Gemara begins and says, "My time of the Rabbi Yeshua." What's the reason of Rabbi Yeshua? Why does Rabbi Yeshua require 2 edim for the stira, for the seclusion? Rabbi Elazar says we only need 1. What's the reason of Rabbi Yeshua? And the Gemara answers, "Omar kra ba, ve'ed ein ba." There are no 2 edim that she did an avera. Ba, there aren't 2 edim that she did an avera. But ba v'loi bekinui, ba v'loi bestira. In kinui, there are 2 edim, and in stira, there are 2 edim. Because we just finished explaining that when the pasuk says ve'ed ein ba, it means to say there aren't 2 edim. Rather, there's only one that witnessed her doing the actual avera. So by the actual avera, there weren't 2 edim, but rather only one. But by the warning and by the stira, there were 2 edim. Now that we answered the question according to Rabbi Yeshua, it actually brings up a question on Rabbi Eliezer. Where does he get his opinion from? However, we presented the shaila, the inquiry, and the tshuva, the response, so we're done. But it leads into bringing up a question for us. That's why it comes from the side, and it's in the gray box with the arrow pointing upwards, because it results from what we said till now. And that is that now we have a question. What's the basis and the reason for the ruling of Rabbi Eliezer? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Eliezer also looks at the word ba. It says ve'ed ein ba. There aren't 2 witnesses by the testimony that the woman actually did an avera, but there are 2 witnesses elsewhere. Where is the elsewhere? He says ba v'loi bekinui. By her, by the tumah, there's not 2 witnesses, but there are 2 witnesses by the kinui. So, but he doesn't learn also ba v'loi bestira, as the Gemara now will proceed to discuss. The Gemara now proceeds to ask a question on the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara asks, Ve'ema, let him say, Ba v'lei bestira. Why does Rabbi Eliezer choose to say Ba v'lei bekinui? The question would seem to mean, not that instead we should say Ba v'lei bestira, we should say both of them, just like Rabbi Yeshua does. Ba means in the case where a woman actually did an avera, it says there weren't 2 edim, there was only 1. In that case, there weren't 2, but there is in the instance of kinui, and there is in the instance of stira. How come it doesn't say just like Rabbi Yeshua? And the Gemara answers, that's because there's a hekesh between stira and tumah. By tumah we said there was only 1 eid. Well, we have a hekesh from tumah to stira. They're both written in the same pasuk, which teaches us to compare them. It says v'nistara v'hi nitma. So that hekesh teaches us that we should apply the din of tumah to stira, and just like by tumah 1 eid is enough, so too by stira 1 eid is enough. Now we're going to see in the next section, the Gemara is going to ask a question on this answer and answer it. The Gemara is going to ask a question on that answer and answer it. Then I'll ask another question on that answer and answer it, and then a final question on that answer. So we'll have a series now, as we'll see a question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, 4 of them. But ultimately it'll all be answered, and that means that this original answer is what stays, and that is that he says ba v'loi bekinui, and he doesn't say ba v'loi bestira, and the reason is because there's a hekesh from tumah to stira to teach us that just like by tumah there's 1 eid, also by stira there's only 1 eid. So we begin now the questioning, and the Gemara asks that kinui also has a hekesh to tumah. It says v'kinui is ishtai v'hi nitma. So we also have a hekesh. So just like we make the hekesh from tumah to stira, that tumah has 1 eid, also stira has 1 eid, we should make the same hekesh from tumah to kinui. Tumah has 1 eid, kinui also does. And the Gemara answers simply, but we have to exclude something from the word ba. Yes, we have the hekesh, but we also have ba. And therefore we're going to use ba for one and the hekesh for the other. And that's why it works out that we make the hekesh from tumah to stira, that stira takes 1 eid is enough, and we do ba v'lei bekinui, that kinui needs 2 eidim. The Gemara persists and challenges the answer. And the Gemara says, what's the reason to exclude kinui and not stira? Why? We're saying that we have to exclude something, and the other one will make a hekesh. Why do we choose to exclude kinui needs 2 edim, and make a hekesh to stira, that stira only needs 1 aid. Why not the reverse? And the Gemara answers, because it makes sense to be stricter. Where are we going to be strict and say, this is so severe that we'll even believe 1 aid? What's happening here is so severe, we're even going to believe 1 aid. Where are we going to do that? Says the Gemara, it makes sense to do it by stira. And the reason is, shekene sarta ketuma. Since it makes her usher, that's what's going to make her usher, is when there is testimony that she secluded herself, that will lead to her being usher. So that's why over there, since it's a stricter thing that leads her to be usher, we're going to say that it's so severe that even 1 aid is enough. The Gemara challenges this answer and says, Adarabba, to the contrary, actually it makes sense to be stricter by kinui. If you look at it legally, you'll say, no, stira actually makes her usher. But on the other hand, there's a stringency which is found in kinui, since it's the reason stira has any effect at all. Stira alone is nothing. If a woman secludes herself with a man, it has no value in halacha. There's no isser involved. It doesn't lead to anything. The only reason the stira by a sotah leads her to be usher is because there was initially a kinui, a warning. So we see that actually when it comes legally, the kinui seems to have a lot more power than the stira. And if that's the case, so we should make the hekesh the kinui. That kinui, since it's such a severe thing, and it creates the whole isser, even 1 aid is enough. And then make the ba v'loi should be for stira. Stira needs 2 aidim. And the Gemara answers that no, if not for stira, then is there any value to kinui? In other words, if a person warns his wife and she doesn't seclude herself, nothing will happen. It was just a warning without any substance. And the Gemara now questions that answer, challenges it. And if not for kinui, then what does stira accomplish? You could ask the same thing the other way around. We're saying that if not for stira, kinui is just a warning without anything. And if not for kinui, then stira won't do anything. A woman secluded herself with a man, it doesn't have anything to it. And the Gemara answers that nevertheless, it doesn't matter. Still, we're going to say that stira is stricter. And the reason is, Sotah Daf. The reason is because stira is the beginning of tumah. What leads to the actual avera is the stira. So we see that there's something more severe in the stira. The stira itself has a connection to the tumah. And therefore, by the stira, we're going to be stricter and say even 1 aid is enough. The way it's explained is that it's not a matter of legally, but in terms of the act that the woman's doing here is an inappropriate act, that she is secluding herself with this man that she was warned against. And therefore, this is like an act. It's not actually the avera, but it's a Sotah Daf. It's in the same realm that a woman is doing something immodest. And therefore, over there, we're going to be stricter. The Gemara now proceeds to present a new discussion on what it says in our Mishnah. And it's in a green box, which is usually used as an answer. And the reason is because similar to an answer, where we come out with how we now look at the Gemara, the correct way, here too it's like a lema. When the Gemara says lema, let us say we take something out of the Mishnah. In this case, we don't just say let us say, we actually do say it. And the Gemara says, masnisin deloi ki hai tana. Our Mishnah does not fit with the following Tana, and it quotes where we find the Tana that the Mishnah doesn't fit with. The Tanya, we learned in a Brisa that Rabbi Yesi, Rabbi Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer says that kinui, the warning, is al pi eid echad oy al pi atzmei, is through the person themselves. They testify that they warned their wife, or through 1 aid that testifies that the person warned his wife. And the mashka, and he makes her drink through testimony that she secluded herself with the man she was warned against secluding herself with, that's al pi shnayim, that's based on 2 witnesses, 2 edim. So this opinion doesn't fit with our Mishnah, because in our Mishnah, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua agree that kinui is only effective if it's with 2 edim. And the Brisa concludes with the Chachamim, and it says, Heishivu Chachamim. The Chachamim said that L'divrei Rabbi Yesi b'Rabbi Yehuda ein l'davar seif. According to this, there's no end. As the Gemara will later examine what this means. But really, this is the totality of this piece. The Gemara is simply pointing out that our Mishnah does not fit with the opinion of Rabbi Yesi b'Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. And then the Gemara will now proceed to have a discussion on this brisa which was mentioned. But really the core that's related to our Gemara, to our Mishnah, has already been complete. The Gemara accepted that our Mishnah doesn't fit with that Tana, and now the Gemara proceeds to address what it did say in that brisa. So it's a side discussion. It's not challenging what we said. What we said is accepted. Our Mishnah does not fit with Rabbi Yesi, but now that we presented the opinion of Rabbi Yesi, the Gemara proceeds to analyze it. And that's why this discussion, as we'll see, there's a number of other parts as well, they all come out of the side, because we're not challenging or having any issue with what was said, but rather, since it was mentioned, the Gemara goes into a discussion on it. And the Gemara presents a shaila, which we'll see is familiar to us, an inquiry, and the Gemara says, "My taima, what is the reason of Rabbi Yesi b'Rabbi Yehuda? Why does he say that the stira needs two edim?" And the Gemara answers, because the pasuk says ba. It says ve'ed ein ba. There are not two edim on this when she did an avera, which means there aren't two edim, but elsewhere there are, which means ba and not in stira. In stira there are two edim. The Gemara then proceeds to challenge this answer. And the Gemara asks, let him say ba and not in kinui. Why doesn't he say that ba, there aren't two edim that she did the avera, but there are two edim by the stira, and there are two edim by the kinui? How come exclusively by the stira he says that there are two edim and not by the kinui? And the Gemara answers, that's because there's a hekesh between kinui and tuma to teach us that just like tuma is with one aid, also kinui is with one aid. It says v'kinei, and then the pasuk says afterwards v'hinitma. So there's a hekesh. They're compared. The Gemara proceeds to challenge this, that stira also has a hekesh to tuma. We also find that stira has a hekesh to tuma. So how come we don't say that stira has one aid just like tuma has one aid? It says v'nistera v'hinitma. And the Gemara answers that that hekesh has a reason already. We already learned something out of it. We don't learn that just like tuma has one aid, so does stira only need one aid. But rather what we learn from that hekesh is that what is the time of stira? What's the amount of time that defines that the stira was a stira that creates a problem? It's the time of tuma, the amount of time it takes to do an avera. The Gemara now proceeds to begin another discussion on this brisa. And the Gemara begins by quoting something from the brisa. And that's why it's in the gray box with the arrow pointing down, because it presents a quote to lead into a shaila, an inquiry. And the quote is, Shivu chachamim, the chachamim responded, Ledivrei Rabbi Yesi b'Rabbi Yehuda, ein ledavar seif. According to Rabbi Yesi b'Rabbi Yehuda, there's no end to it. So the Gemara quotes this and leads into its shaila, its inquiry. And the question is, what does this mean? What do they mean when they said there's no end to it? And the Gemara presents the tshuva, its response, and that is that sometimes a husband won't do kinui and claim that he did. There's no end to it, because since kinui is something that according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yesi b'Rabbi Yehuda, only needs the testimony of the husband himself to say that he did so, or one aid. So the husband can just simply testify that he warned his wife against secluding herself. And it'll be endless, because anytime a woman secludes herself with a man, the husband can just come and say that he warned her against doing so, and we trust the husband. So therefore it leads to a situation where it's endless, because now the husband can just pursue the wife in this regard endlessly. Now that we understand what it means, the Gemara asks a side question. Fine, we answered our question, but now there's another question here which comes out of it. That's why it's coming out of the side. And that is, and according to our Mishnah, there is an end. A husband may lie that his wife secluded herself. Also in our Mishnah, we have the same issue according to Rabbi Eliezer. He says that for the seclusion, it's enough that the husband claims that he witnessed his wife secluding herself alone with this man. There's also no end to it. The husband will simply warn his wife in front of two edim, and then afterwards claim that his wife secluded herself with that man. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yechanan said, the way you have to understand what the Chachamim is saying, they're saying that also according to Rabbi Yesi, there's no end to it. They don't mean to say that only according to Rabbi Yesi. Also, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's first of all according to Rabbi Eliezer, and furthermore, it's also according to Rabbi Yossi. So now we understand how what the Chachamim were saying is not limited exclusively to Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara proceeds to present the challenge to this, and the Gemara says, what do you mean also according to Rabbi Yossi? Also implies that it's mostly according to our Mishnah that there's no end, and also according to Rabbi Yossi. It's actually the opposite, it's the reverse. It's mostly according to Rabbi Yossi that there's no end. Because there's no foundation at all. Any husband can simply come, his wife will obviously seclude herself from time to time with a man, and the husband can simply come and claim that he already warned her. So there's no end to that whatsoever. Whereas in the case that the husband claims that his wife secluded herself, it's not something which could just be brought up at any time. It has to be specifically if he warned her in front of two Eidim not to seclude herself with that man. So there's a limit. There's much more of a constraint on the husband. And as a result, the Gemara retracts its original answer, which was, on the question. The question is, how come Chacham say that according to Rabbi Yossi there's no end? Even according to Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah there's no end. And the Gemara said it means also according to Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says instead, say also according to our Mishnah. Not also according to Rabbi Yossi, mostly according to Rabbi Yossi. And also according to our Mishnah there's no end. So it basically keeps the same idea as the first answer, which is that the Chachamim are saying that there's no end both for Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Eliezer. The thing is that they're saying it's mostly according to Rabbi Yossi that there's no end, and also according to Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah. The Gemara now proceeds to another new point relating to the brisa that was mentioned, and this is a teaching from Rabbi Chanina Masura. Rabbi Chanina Masura said that a person should not do kinui these days because maybe we hold of Rabbi Yossi. So a person shouldn't warn his wife these days, because maybe we hold of Rabbi Yossi that kinui is effective, even though there are no witnesses there. And if his wife secludes herself, and there are two Eidim that witness it, it'll create a big problem. She'll be also forever since we don't have the Mei Sotah. Because according to Rabbi Yossi, if a husband warns his wife not to seclude herself with a certain man, that warning is effective in Torah. If afterwards now she secludes herself with that man and two witnesses witness this, she has now become usher to her husband. She's forbidden to live with him unless she drinks the Mei Sotah to permit herself, if she claims, and it's truly the case, that she didn't do an Avera. But today we don't have that option because we don't have the Mei Sotah. So as a result, Rabbi Chanina Masura rules that today a person should not warn his wife against it because it could lead to this tremendous problem. The Gemara now proceeds to present a new teaching, which, as we'll see, also relates to this new opinion of Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, that kinui is able to be done through the husband himself. And the Gemara presents the teaching, Amar Reish Lakish said, Ma l'shein kinui. What is the meaning of the word kinui? What lashon does it come from? And he says it's davar hamatel kina beina lebein acherim. It's something that creates anger between her, the wife, and others. And the Gemara now says, what do we deduce from this? And that's why it's in a gray box with the arrow pointing upwards, because it indicates that it's something which relates to what we just said. And the Gemara says, Alma kasaver kinui al pi atzmai. So we see that Reish Lakish holds that kinui is even done by the husband himself. And that's how it leads to anger, and no one knows that the husband warned her. So the husband warned her, nobody knows, and they will become upset that she distances herself from them. They don't know why. So this is something that creates anger between her and others, which refers to men that she is now avoiding. The Gemara now proceeds to present a different explanation for what's lashon kinui, because according to Reish Lakish, it only fits with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi ruled that kinui can be done by the husband himself without any edim. However, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah, they both rule and they both hold that kinui has to be done in front of two edim. So the Gemara says, V'Rav Yemar bar Rabbi Shalmi Amishmeda Baya Omar, that the lashon kinui is davar hamatel kina beinay lebeina. The lashon of kinui is it's something that creates anger between him and her. And again, the Gemara proceeds, and we have it in a gray box with an arrow pointing upwards because it relates to what we just said, and it takes something out of it. That alma kasaver kinui al pishnaim edim. We see that he holds that the warning is only in front of two edim. And what happens is, and everyone knows that the husband warned her because the word gets out, 2 Eidim were there at the time, and it's the husband who then comes to cause her to be angry. The husband makes his wife angry, and she then creates a situation that she starts being in a situation of anger because he suspects her, and the word got out. As Rashi says, "Shezu maknitasei al shechoshta." She starts to badger and be upset at him because the fact that he suspects her and that the word got out that he suspects her. The Gemara concludes, Almaka Savri the Osir Lakanis. It's in a gray box again with the arrow pointing upwards because it relates to both of these opinions. That's why it points to both of them. That we see from here that they both hold, both Reish Lakish and Rav Yemar, they both hold that it's forbidden to do kino. And as Rashi says, Kevan da Omri Loshan Atalos Kinohu Alma Osir. If the whole name of this thing that everything starts from is called kinoi, and kinoi is about the anger, so then obviously it's something which is forbidden. It's not a positive thing. This now leads into a side shaila, a side inquiry, because now that we mentioned that they both hold that kinoi is forbidden, that it's usr, so the Gemara then asks or inquires, Umanda Amar Mutter Lakanes, Mahu L'Shem Kinoi, and according to the opinion that it's permitted to do kinoi, what's the meaning of the word kinoi? What's the lashon then? And the Gemara responds, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok, Ein kinoi ela lashon hasra. Kinoi means warning. And he brings a source for this. And it also says, Vayekane Hashem la'artze, which means then Hashem will issue a warning about his land. So we see that there is an alternative explanation for what is the lashon of kinui. So we begin over here and we see this last section where we have the teaching of Reish Lakish and Rav Yemar of what's the lashon kinui, and we say that according to both of them it's forbidden, it's usr, as well as the side opinion where over there we explained what's the lashon kinoi according to the opinion that it's mutter, it's permitted to do kinoi. Over here in this section we have in front of us the Gemara saying that our Mishnah doesn't fit with the Tana, Rabbi Yasi, who says that kinoi could be done even by the person himself or with one aid, one witness is enough. And then we had the discussion explaining what's the position of Rabbi Yasi based on, we asked what does it mean, Heshivu Chachamim, what did the Chachamim respond, as well as that teaching that because of the opinion of Rabbi Yasi, today a person should avoid being Mekana his wife. Here we have the section where we inquired and then explained what is the basis for the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, that both kinui and stira require 2 edim, and what is the basis for the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that only kinui requires 2 edim, but stira only requires 1 aid. This comes after the Gemara made an observation that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah only argue about kinoi and stira. However, they both agree that for tumah 1 aid is believed. And the Gemara then proceeded, as we'll see, it was in the previous piece, the Gemara then proceeded to bring a Mishnah that also supports this. So over here, the Gemara then proceeded to inquire what's the source for it in the Torah. The Gemara presented the source by bringing the background from a brisa, which then led into how we see it. But then we had the whole side discussion regarding the details in the brisa, because the structure of the brisa basically told us that the only way we know that when it says ve'ed einba, that it means that ve'ed means 2 edim, is only because of a different pasuk that teaches us that whenever the word aid is used, it means 2. Otherwise, we'd think it means 1. And the Gemara challenged, how could we ever think it means 1? And the Gemara explained ultimately how we could think it was 1. It is possible to interpret and learn the pasuk that it's referring to 1, and therefore it is necessary to have that other pasuk which teaches us that whenever it says aid, it does not mean 1, but rather it means 2. Here we had 3 different points, really 2 though. The first is what Reish Lakish taught us, that Hashem gives a person a shidduch, a zivug, based on his actions, on his deeds. And then we said kashal azavgan, and then we asked the contradiction, and we explained it's referring specifically to the second zivug, that's done on a person's deeds. And then the second part is which we mentioned, that where the Gemara points out that the Tanaim of our Mishnah clearly hold that for tumah, that the woman did an avera, only 1 aid is enough. Only 1 aid is required. And here we have the very beginning of the Gemara that consists of 2 points. Number 1 was the the question and discussion why Maseches Sotah was placed here by Rebbe. And number two, an observation that the Tanoim of our Mishnah are of the opinion that kinui is forbidden, and that's why it talks about it in terms of b'di'evet. If somebody already did it, these are the rules about it. But it's not something that a person should lechatchila do.